Field joined the State Department as a Foreign Service officer in 1926. During the 1930s, he became a Soviet agent. Lawrence Duggan was head of the Latin American desk of the State Department and was a political advisor to the Secretary of State. He, too, was a Soviet agent. Both Duggan and Field were brought into a Soviet espionage ring by the same recruiter, a woman of amazing persuasiveness.
I got them Noel Field, and I got them Larry Duggan, and I got them all, you know, sort of small fry, like Brian, and, you know, technical personnel, several women that were mail drops, and so on and so forth. And it was always done, for example, with women, it was mostly done with sex. I would always send somebody who was handsome, and they generally went to bed with whatever it was, and it worked.
During the 1930s, Haida Massing was Soviet espionage's most effective recruiting agent in America. This is her only television interview, filmed shortly before her death in 1981. During the 1920s, she married into the Communist Party in Europe, falling in love with its intrigue and fellowship. Her first husband was Gerhard Eisler, a top official of the Communist international espionage arm, the Comintern.
When you were 17 and you joined the Communist Party, or became a member of that
Yes.
circle, was it an emotional rather than a political conversion?
Only emotional, not political at all. Didn't understand a thing about politics. As I said, I would have understood this one sentence. It is a theory, an ideology, which has as its aim a better life for all. Well, that was good enough for me, better life for all. I'm amongst all. But that was as political as it was. Otherwise, it was emotional. I married into the party.
But for somebody who didn't understand it, you became one of their most effective operators.
Later, much, much, much later. Much later, when I understood much more, and when really my effectiveness is so closely married, connected to fascism. I was effective because there was fascism, and fascism had to be fought. It took me a long time, and I didn't want to realize it, that actually I was not fighting fascism. It was all baloney. The Russians used me. But to admit that to yourself is, of course, very degrading, self-degrading. You hesitate very much to do that. So for a long time, I pretended that I believed that this is the way to fight fascism, and I acted it out.
Okay, well, let's go into some of the areas where you were very successful. You came over to America in the early 1930s. What did you do, and how did you get into that circle where you could operate effectively?
Well, first of all, when I came, I knew people. You see, I knew people. I'd met people in Moscow. I'd met many Americans in Moscow. I was a functionary. For example, I was called on by the Comintern to entertain important Americans when they came to Moscow. So I had connections, personal connections.
The connections were with those in the American government. So Haida Massing, closely controlled by the Russians, working in New York City, and armed with a sharp wit and a fierce determination, went on to recruit Lawrence Duggan, one of the senior members of the U.S. State Department.
You know, the thing that is so interesting is it wasn't difficult. I called him because I understood, you know, he was a friend of Noel Field, and said that I wanted to see him, and I went into the State Department, into his room, and we made an appointment. And I approached him directly, hard. Larry, I said, you know, I needn't tell you about fascism. You know it all. You know it better than I, because you see all the material I don't see. We want your help. Will you help us? And he said, yes. I have certain conditions, but yes, I will help you. Now, I will give you all the material that I think might be of interest to you and the Russians. He knew immediately who I was. He was nobody's fool. And only I will not give you the material per se. I will dictate it to somebody, and the somebody has to be English speaking and a very good shorthand. There it was. I couldn't believe it.
While recruiting Noel Field, Haida Massing uncovered another Soviet spy ring in Washington, of which she had been unaware.
I had worked on Noel Field for a long time. I had listened to Wagner, which I hate. I had read Freud, which I dislike, and discussed fine points of Freud with him, you know, really lying in my teeth. And because I wanted him. I wanted to do a good job. And I also liked the family. I liked her better than him. He was a little bit, although he was rather good looking, you know, very tall and very sort of gentlemanlike, to me he was a little bit unappetizing. It must have been a body smell. I don't know what it was, but anyhow, I liked her better. She was also more honest. She was a little dumb. And one day, I said, you know, Noel, it's about time that you have more or less agreed that you will work with me. Now, I think we ought to start. And he said, you know, Haida, I wanted to tell you this, and I hesitated because I know it will upset you, but I have decided that I will not work with you, but I would rather work with somebody who does exactly the same thing you do, who is, however, with me in the same department. And it would be so much easier technically to convey whatever I have to give to this person. And I said, who is this person? Of course, terrified. Here was my investment of 1 year studying Wagner and Freud for that, what you should, anyhow, I said, who is this man? And he said, I don't think you know him. His name is Alger Hiss.
He was an advisor to President Roosevelt at the crucial Yalta Conference and was the man who flew to Washington with the historic charter documents of the United Nations Organizing Conference in San Francisco, where he had served as temporary Secretary General. Alger Hiss was a rising star in the State Department and director of the Office of Special Political Affairs. He was never far from center stage. After allegations were made of his communist activities, he appeared before the House Un-American Activities Committee.
I am not and never have been a member of the Communist Party.
Throughout 2 famous trials and a conviction for perjury, he has steadfastly proclaimed his innocence. And today there is a strong lobby in the United States to overturn his convictions.
Things Mr. Chambers charged, except that I knew him briefly.
Were you ever a communist?
No.
This man's memory is rather different. Nathaniel Weil was a member of the same Communist Party cell as Alger Hiss.
I want to ask you if you ever met Alger Hiss.
Oh, yes, about 30 times or so, 30 or 40.
Under what circumstances?
Well, I'm speaking about, you see, the cell met every week. And attendance was a duty to be taken very seriously. You had to have an extremely good excuse for not being there. So that if one assumes that I was in this unit for 9 months and that there was a meeting every week, it works out to about 30 or 40 times.
But Haida Massing, trying to recruit Noel Field, had no idea that Alger Hiss was also working for the Soviets. Each of the communist cells were small and carefully separated. In this case, both Alger Hiss and Haida Massing were trying to recruit the same man.
I met Alger Hiss because Noel called me a week after I'd been there in New York and said, can you come to Washington? I have a dinner date for you and Alger Hiss at my house. And I said, of course I'll come. And I came, and I met him. And the beginning was that he said, so you are the girl that is trying to take Noel away from me. And I said, well, you are the man who is trying to take Noel away from me. And then I said, I suppose, I don't know the exact words, don't forget, after all, I'm female and I'm a fighter, and I won't let that happen so easily. And he grinned, and then we had all sorts of conversations. We stood alone, he and I, at the window and spoke, and the farewell was that I said, or he said, and I don't remember who said what, but I think he said, whoever gets Noel, after all, we are working for the same boss.